Chainsaw Man's art style has changed so much throughout part 2, and we see this directly with these three characters, Denji, Yoshida, and Asa, and I just want to show y'all the differences between early part 2's art style and present part 2's art style. So first, let's start off with Denji. So at the start of part 2, Fujimoto was going for a clean, less is more art style, and this is how Denji looked. He looks really clean, and I love the loose and swift line art, and he is rounder. And then we get to present part 2, and his art is very different. The line art is more thicker now, and it's no longer loose or swift, and it feels more stiff. And yeah, his art looks a lot different, but I'll say the improvement for his art is that it stands out way more now. Early part 2's art style was a lot looser and less defined, and that's what I like a lot more about present part 2's art style, but early part 2's art style had way better details. Early part 2 had thinner line art, so they could add way more details. But that's how Denji looks now into Yoshida, and this is how he looks in early part 2, and I think for present part 2, he looks pretty much the same. Like there's thinner and looser line art here, but in the newer chapters, his face is more thicker and more defined. He doesn't look bad, and another difference from early part 2 to present part 2 is that the eyes are a lot bigger now. Like early part 2 had smaller eyes and it's kind of more realistic, but in present part 2 the eyes have gone up way in size, and I kind of do like early part 2's eyes better than present part 2's eyes. But Yoshida looks fine in present part 2, now into Asa. So this is the very first panel we see of Asa, and this is how she looks. It has loose and thin line art with realistic faces, and this is how she looks in part 2, and she honestly looks a lot different from everybody else. Of course there's thicker line art, but her eyes and face look a lot different. It's not as slim as it used to be, and there's not as much detail. Like she looked really good with Fujimoto's loose line work, and she does look good here and there, but I think she does look better in early part 2. Her design looked a lot more consistent in early part 2 compared to present part 2. And I'll say another thing that present part 2 does better than early part 2 is that it has better facial expressions. It just feels like sometimes they convey more expression than early part 2's. It feels a lot more subtle and realistic, and I like it. But those are the differences in early part 2's art style compared to present part 2's art style. It's thicker line art, the lines are a lot less loose, and the eyes, nose, and mouth are bigger. But let me know guys what you think of his new art.